Hi, it's Taylor. Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to my channel. We're going to talk about neuroticism at length today. I had a request from someone who watched my short video to expand on the topic, and it does warrant a little more conversation, so I'm happy to dig into it. It seems to be a really relevant and prevalent issue. I work mostly with men. I work with women as well, but it's probably about 70 to 80% of my clients are men and the rest women. Now, the men that I work with are very high functioning, they're very successful, they're quite impressive, and I respect them tremendously. They have a few quirks or a few parts of their lives that still need refinement. And one of the things that tends to come up is this personality trait of neuroticism. Not in all of them, but definitely in a good number, and it warrants our attention. If you're watching this, who knows? Maybe you've experienced this yourself, or maybe you know someone who experiences this and you have to deal with that and react to that from them. Neuroticism is one of the big 5 personality traits, and it's defined as a tendency toward anxiety, depression, self-doubt, and other negative feelings. And it has subscales that include 6 facets: anxiety, anger, hostility, depression, self-consciousness, impulsiveness, and vulnerability. It may be alarming to hear the word neurotic, neuroticism, neuroses used to describe your behavior, but don't be alarmed. This doesn't mean that you are pathological, that you are mentally ill and something is broken or wrong with you that needs to be fixed with psychiatric treatment. Now, like most other psychological and behavioral traits, it exists on a spectrum. There's a scale. So you may have very little neuroticism, or on the other end, if you have really high levels of neuroticism, you may or may not meet the clinical criteria for any kind of mental illnesses that involve that cluster of symptoms. So generally speaking, it's something that everyone's going to display at one time or another. But for some people, I'm seeing that it is their particular weakness, that they have behaviors clustered around this neuroticism that can create a lot of difficulties and barriers in creating connections and maintaining connections in their relationships, whether platonic, same sex, or opposite sex in romantic relationships. And ultimately, this is something you need to confront and address in your own personal work, whether in therapy, coaching, or some level of self-study, so that you can smooth out those edges, understand where it comes from, and then work to remediate this. So you want to be able to develop better, more adaptive and effective behaviors so that it's not so hard to connect with people and it doesn't pose as this barrier in creating meaningful relationships in your life. So here we go. I'm going to give you the 10 behaviors that I see demonstrated by people who I would call neurotic. Impatience. They have a hard time sitting, slowing down, and waiting things out. They really are agitated by that process. They want things to be quick and they want things to happen as soon as they want them to happen. And so that's a very common one. Pressured speech is another one. Pressured speech is a fancy term for talks a lot, kind of like a train coming down the tracks really fast. And this goes into the next one. They can tend to repeat themselves and feel like, to the listener, that they're stuck. So it's almost like a broken record running around in circles. So that's another sign that I see, is this tendency to over-explain and go around in circles. Now, this is probably from the self-consciousness, which is the next trait that I see a lot. So that's someone who may be confident, but they're over-analyzing things, which is another one, thinking about how other people are viewing them way too much and judging themselves too harshly. Another very common one is interrupting others. So that can go with impatience, but they're not able to stop talking and listen very effectively. They may be very intelligent and very good at talking, but listening and being receptive to feedback is definitely not one of their strong suits. Doesn't mean that it can't be, but this is something that they have to practice in order to get better at active listening and communicating empathically to others. Now, they have empathy, but they're so focused on themselves and being self-conscious that it's often hard for them to demonstrate that they are feeling empathy for other people. And this will really interrupt and interfere with that connection process in relationships. So, if I haven't mentioned it before, jumping to conclusions is another one. So, they're basically playing out worst case scenarios or making assumptions very reactively in circumstances, often in a way that paints themselves or the outcome in a very bad light for what they want. Now, I want to share with you how this is problematic in a romantic relationship specifically. Imagine you're getting to know someone in the beginning stages, which I call vetting, and this is how you present on first, second, third date, perhaps phone conversations in between, or texting can be really problematic for someone with a neurotic mind like this. It's difficult to connect with them, and it's going to push away a healthy woman because that woman is trying to connect to a confident, composed, masculine man who's well integrated and balanced and stable. And that self consciousness is actually a very feminine trait. Obviously, the neuroticism happens in both men and women, but it is from the more feminine side of a man's energy that this is displayed. So, a man who may be very masculine but has this neuroticism as a weakness, a pronounced weakness, is not balanced. He's not integrated enough between his masculine and feminine, or if you want to talk about Jung's terms of anima and animus. He needs to really look at his anima and understand maybe what from his childhood could have influenced this, from his attachment, which we talk about often, or it can be from unresolved behavioral difficulties that happened in childhood. I have a theory, and this is not evidence based, but from my experience, this tendency comes from men who typically would have displayed or presented as attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADD as a child. I think a lot of it is adaptive and a lot of it is shed as they are able to find success and competence in life. But that general tendency then evolves into this neuroticism in adulthood. And they may be successful. They may be a very high functioning man with a lot of things going for him. But this is kind of his Achilles heel. I'm going to throw in a caveat here because what I've been talking about is neuroticism that manifests in a very extroverted way, but there's also a very introverted mannerism for neuroticism to show up in. And this quote is a good example from a client of mine who gave me permission to share this. It says, I find that I get too much in my head and become my biggest stumbling block. Once I start to consciously think about asking someone out or going out by myself, I become self conscious and engage in self talk that is sabotaging. When I do not enter that mindset, I find that I meet people rather easily and have no problem conversing. So much so, whenever I confess to someone I have these issues, they are surprised and do not think of me as being shy. So you can see how this would be a lack of action. This example really highlights the self consciousness aspect rooted in anxiety. So you'll see the overthinking and the rumination part of neuroticism. If any of these neurotic behaviors resonate for you, it's really important for you to learn self regulation so that they won't create barriers in your relationships going forward. I like to work with these men when I see this because I really want to help them quiet their mind, slow down, and not jump to conclusions, to really just be in the present moment and be responsive and proactive, not reactive or erratic, and to learn outcome independence. That's another thing that I talk about often, and I'll link a video to that one as well below. But hopefully that explains my view, my take on neuroticism as it applies to men. So if you like this video, give it a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate your engagement because it helps the channel grow. And if you'd like to comment below, I'd love to hear from you. Ask me your questions. And if you do want to talk to me on a free 15 or 30-minute call, it kind of extends a little bit usually because I like to talk and get to know people. You can request that below as well. But I hope you subscribe to the channel and stick around for more videos from me. Ciao!